Hi guys, this is Micah. We're here for a very special episode of the Book Syndicate. We're here with Adam Peltier from the Windsor Public Library. Adam, why don't you tell them exactly what today's episode's all about?
We have a very special guest here today. We're glad to have cartoonist and author Jeff Lemire kick off our special Canada 150 speaker series.
I want to thank everyone for coming by today. This is an amazing opportunity to speak with a very talented writer, cartoonist, and just all around someone who's really highlighted, I think, the uniqueness of Essex County. Of course, today we'll be speaking with Jeff Lemire. I want to thank Jeff for coming by today, and I also want to thank every one of you for coming out today to hear this conversation and take part of it. Just before we get going, we actually have a few words that are going to be spoken from our counselor, Plutona. Mr. Plutona, please come up here.
So I wanted to welcome you here on behalf of the library board, on behalf of the board chair, Peter Fries, who's here today, Kitty Pope, who is the CEO of the Windsor Public Library. This is going to be the inaugural event for the Windsor Public Library Canada 150 Speaker Series, which they have initiated in celebration of our nation's birthday this year. We will be featuring a number of speakers throughout the year, and I urge anyone interested in the many famous Windsorites we have to visit our website and to learn more about the fine Canadians with connections to Windsor. So before I get into some of the talking notes that I have laid out, because I don't want to miss anything, I did want to just add a few comments about being very happy to be invited to introduce Mr. Lemire today for a few reasons. I remember when the project was announced by CBC and having some of my initial reactions, and the first one was, oh wow, that's Jeff Lemire, he's from Windsor, Essex. This is such a great project, and it's so great to see somebody local as being part of it. But the second part was really to do with some of the comments that were made by Gord Downie about the project. And one of the things that stuck out for me specifically as being someone who's involved in politics is that we tend to sort of focus on all the great things that we look for in society, in our city, the pride in our city, and try to increase the pride. And we all feel a great pride as being Canadians, and there's a lot of reasons to feel that pride as Canadians. But what this story does is actually make us look in the mirror, I believe Gord Downie said, and look at the things that we shouldn't be proud of, and the things that we've done in our past, and we as a society, as Canadians, have done that have been questionable, that have been hard, and are hard to accept. We tend to focus on all the great things that make us Canadians, and what this story did was really put it into great context about some of the things that we really messed up in the past. And it was a great tool to sort of open that conversation. It got to be a tool that could open a conversation up for me and my kids, and sort of the role that as Canadians, Canadian government has had in the time and lifespan of Indigenous peoples in this country. So it was an incredibly moving story. The book, the videos that went along with it, listening to all the interviews with Mr. Downie about the things that and the passion that went into the project, really made this something that hit home for me, and obviously with a lot of you seeing as the huge crowd that's here today. So without further ado, I'll introduce Jeff, as it's great. Again, he's sort of has reached mythical proportions in this city, especially if you are a comic book fan and illustrated story fan. So because of that, I will be reading the notes because I don't like missing any of the great things that the guests come and have. So with Hollywood, CBC, and book publishers knocking on his door, we are indeed privileged to have Jeff Lemire with us today. His time is precious, so we are extremely grateful to him for allowing us to share some of it with him. Jeff is the New York Times best-selling author who has built a brilliant career as a writer and artist of award-winning literary graphic novels like Essex County, The Underwater Welder, Sweet Tooth, and Trillium, and also one of the most popular writers of mainstream superhero comics with acclaimed runs on such titles as Green Arrow, Animal Man, Justice League, and Hawkeye for Marvel and DC Comics. An Essex County product, Jeff grew up in Woodsley, and in March 2016, Maclean's magazine article recounts that all of his spare time after school, sports, or household chores was spent reading superhero comics and creating his own stories. And we are thankful he did. Jeff told Maclean's that everything changed for him in 2006 when he found inspiration in Essex County. Named for the place he grew up, the 3-volume graphic novel was a huge success. In 2010, Essex County became the first graphic novel to be included in the prestigious Canada Reads contest, making it to the final 5 and winning the People's Choice vote as Best Canadian Novel of the Decade. Since then, Jeff has won critical acclaim on a regular basis. In 2008 and in 2013, Jeff won the Schuster Award for Best Canadian Cartoonist. He has also received the Doug Wright Award for Best Emerging Talent and the American Library Association's prestigious Alex Award, recognizing books for adults with specific teen appeal. He has also been nominated for 8 Eisner Awards, 7 Harvey Awards, and 8 Schuster Awards. His upcoming projects include the original graphic novel Roughneck from Simon & Schuster, as well as the sci-fi series Descender for Image Comics and Black Hammer for Dark Horse Comics. We'll be having a conversation today with Jeff about his collaboration with Gord Downie of the Tragically Hip on Secret Path, a 10-song album and accompanying graphic novel which tells the story of Charlie Wenjack, who ran away from residential schools and subsequently died from hunger and exposure to the harsh weather. His death sparked the national attention and led to the first inquest into the treatment of Indigenous children in Canadian residential schools. So without further ado, Mr. Lemire.
So first and foremost, I want to give you, honest to God, thank you for coming to Windsor today, because I know you have a lot of fans here. You can see out here we have, it looks like over 100 people have come to this event. And obviously all of these people in some way or another have been touched by the works that you've made. So again, a really genuine thank you for coming to the library today.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to come home.
So as we heard, we will be discussing your most recent work, Secret Path, as well as some other books that you've created throughout your career. I do want to touch on Secret Path, though, to start out with.
Sure.
So the most, interesting thing that I found about this book is that it's a deviation from what you usually write, because it features almost no dialogue. So how did you find the process of writing a narrative story with almost no script to follow?
It was actually really amazing because normally I write my own things that I draw, so this was kind of my first collaboration with another art. Like Gord had written the songs already. Just to give you some background on it, Gord and his brother Mike Downie had approached me late 2013. So this book was actually done quite a while ago. But they approached me. They were fans of Essex County and they had become sort of obsessed, probably isn't the right word, but really focused on the story of Channy Wenjack, and Gord had written these 10 songs and recorded them already. Sorry, can everyone hear me okay? I think I was. So he already had the music when he came to me, which was, normally I'll have a script to work from, but this is the first time I had the music to work from. So I could, the process was really taking each song and trying to create a small, self-contained story for each song that would obviously go together to tell the bigger story. I didn't have a script, I had something else. I had music, which is a lot more, it's not as literal as a script, so it allowed me to take more chances creatively and to be a little less literal and a little more poetic with my imagery. And also, it was kind of this gift that every day I could put the music on and literally be listening to it constantly as I drew. So you have that constantly, the mood and the tone and everything was there. It wasn't something I had to come up with. It was literally going through my head as I drew every day, and I was feeling the emotion. And it was a pretty powerful and short process. I think I drew the whole thing a month and a half, 2 months, just really intense every day, kind of listening to music and drawing.
So, in terms of the challenge for this, one thing I noticed, and I did mention this before, that there was no dialogue in the book. Well, very little dialogue. Was this a conscious choice of yours, or did Downie want that?
I don't know that. I don't even know that we ever had the conversation. It just seemed logical because we already had the music, so there was no need for dialogue. I think maybe early on I kind of played around with a more literal adaptation of the story where I started to write dialogue and stuff. But there's so much about it that's unknown, so much of that story that's undocumented. It felt like I was inventing things that I shouldn't be, because it is a real story and it really did happen and it involved real people. And when you started putting words into people's mouths and things, it seemed like I was crossing some line of inventing the history that wasn't there. So if we stuck to just the music and the visuals, it stayed a little more ambiguous. Also, one of my favorite things about comics in general is it's a visual medium and how you can do so much without words. I think in the best things that I've done, Essex County and other things, have been pretty sparse in their dialogue anyway. So I've always enjoyed trying to communicate as much as I can visually, and only using words when you have to. So this was a great challenge in trying to communicate a story and emotion and everything, all the information that needed to be conveyed without just whatever lyrics Gord was singing and visuals. It was a great challenge, and I really enjoyed it, actually, yeah.
Now, the story of Channy Wenjack has actually gotten a lot of attention this year. There's the graphic novel, Gord Downie's album. There was also the accompanying CBC animated film as well. And there was a separate novel written by Joseph Boyden and even references in the latest Tribe Called Red album. So why do you think at this time there's so much attention being paid to the story of Channy?
It's Gord. Gord and his wife, I think it was actually Mike Downie, his brother, who found the old Maclean's article in the 60s written by a guy named Ian Adams. Ian was the only guy who really documented this back then. And if you think back, this is 1966 or 67, so he was really ahead of his time in sort of taking on this issue, Ian was, but we kind of been forgotten. Except for Charlie's sister, Pearl, was pretty active in the Aboriginal communities, keeping his story alive, but it was really Mike and Gord who kind of adopted this story, and I know they're the ones that shared it with Joseph and with all these other artists. Again, this was 2013-14, we were planning all this stuff, knowing that the 50th anniversary of his death was this year, so it was kind of trying to get everything, as many projects lined up as they could around the story for the anniversary to try to make exactly what's happened to bring awareness to it. So Gord really was the driving force behind all the different projects that have come out and around the awareness that's happened as a result. And of course, the circumstances involving Gord's health pushed him into a spotlight that he probably wouldn't have had. So if anything positive can come of Gord's illness, I know it was the fact that he was able to take this story and bring it to so many people at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Is there anything that stands out for you about this story, about what happened with Channy Wenjack? Anything that has a personal effect on you?
Well, it's one of the things I struggled with right away when they approached me about it, and I know Gord struggled with it as well, is that neither Gord nor I are Indigenous. We have no Native background, we're both white guys from southwestern Ontario, right? So this isn't really our story to tell, and it never was. But at the same time, we were both so moved by the story of this little boy who just wanted to go home, and when you boil it all down to that, it's so moving, and I have a son who's 7, and you try to project some of the emotion that you would feel if this was your own child that this had happened to, and it's such an emotional thing that even though it really wasn't our story, we both just, right or wrong, felt compelled to tell it. While I was working on it, I didn't really, if you think too much about the bigger issues that the story taps into about residential schools and the history, it can be kind of it can almost paralyze you because it's such a big issue, and who am I to tell the story and to do it justice. And so what I really just focused on was the emotion of this one little boy, and put myself in his shoes every day as much as I could, because when this was happening to him, he was not aware of his place in history or the bigger issues surrounding what he was involved in. He was just a little boy wanting to go home, and as long as I stuck with that, I felt like that was the compass to stay true to the story.
Now, there was another book, as I mentioned before, that was released about Chanie Wenjack this year, and that was by Joseph Boyden. Now, were you aware that Boyden was writing this novel at the time that you were composing Secret Path?
Not really. I mean, Gord and Joseph are old friends, so I know that Gord was the one that sort of introduced the story of Chanie Wenjack to Joseph as well. But it was never really linked. It was Gord's Secret Path project with myself and the other musicians who worked on the album, Kevin Drew and Dave Hamlin. We were kind of our own little self-contained thing, and we knew there would be other projects happening at the same time, but we weren't all linked together or working together. We were really just focused on this one thing. And yeah.
Did you have a lot of chance to consult with the musicians and with Gord Downie himself?
With Gord, yeah. Gord was, so this was like 2014. I started working on it, and I spent a lot of time with Gord. We went up north on a crazy snowmobile trip with Gord Downie, which was surreal, pretty fun. And then after that, he would come to my studio every couple weeks, kind of check in, see what I was drawing, and I'd go through what I was working on, and we'd just hang out and stuff, which was cool. This is obviously all before he got ill, so so we stayed in really close touch, but he was very hands-off. Like he had given me the music, and we had many conversations about, I would ask him questions about sort of what his intentions were with a certain song, what he was thinking, what certain lyrics meant to him, things like that. But it was never a matter of him telling me what I had to draw. He really gave me the music and then let me do my thing. He had faith in me to do that. So it was more just show and tell, me showing him what I'd been doing. And there was only one or two instances where he kind of gave me feedback of like, oh, I was kind of thinking more like this, and then I would go back and change things. But that didn't happen very often. Yeah, so we stayed in pretty close contact throughout the process. I finished it in, I think it was fall of 14 that I finished the book, and we decided to sit on it because he had a hip album coming out, whatever the last hip album was that came out, and he didn't want his solo album and the hip thing to come out too close together. And then of course his illness happened, and that changed the timing of things. But throughout the whole process of creating the book, we were in close contact.
Now, I actually want to start talking about some of your other works, and something that's coming out in the near future. Now, this is a book that will be published by Simon & Schuster, and it's Roughneck.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, it's really linked to Secret Path in a lot of ways, because I had been working on Roughneck when Gord approached me about Secret Path, and there was already so many themes between the two projects right away that overlapped. A brief synopsis of Roughneck is it's the story of an ex-NHL tough guy from the north, from a fictional northern town, which is really kind of Moose factory, where I'd spent a little bit of time. And this is 10 years after his career kind of ended after a really violent on-ice incident. He kicked out of the league, and he's just been in this spiral of self-destruction and alcoholism and violence since then. And then his sister, who he hasn't seen since they were teenagers, comes back to the small town, and she's even more messed up than he is. And together they kind of go on this journey of revisiting their past and sort of everything that made them who they are. And it's a story of healing and of brothers and sisters. And so I was already working on this project, which sort of dealt with some, Indigenous Canadian issues and history. And when Gord approached me about Secret Path, and when he found that out, it just seemed like fate that we found each other at the right time. So Roughneck was actually done before Secret Path, but we knew we wanted to put Secret Path out for the anniversary of Chaney's death, so we kind of shelved Roughneck until this spring. So, but yeah, they complement each other quite well, I think.
Now, one thing that I noticed when I was perusing through Simon & Schuster's website, they described you as a literary graphic novelist. What do you think about that term?
No, I don't know. It's like a marketing term, you know. It's like it makes me sound more important than I am. I just do comics.
So you don't find there's any distinction?
But I never know when people ask what my occupation is. It's like you say comic book artist, and then they presume that I draw Batman or something. You say comic book writer. There's never really one term. You say cartoonist, and they think I do Garfield. You know, it's like, there's never a great graphic novelist. I guess is the most accurate description of what I do at this point.
Well, I've noticed something in the comics camp. You usually have people who write for the tights and capes stories, and then there are people who write more personal memoir style narratives like Seth or Chris Ware. And you have this really interesting blend of the two, where you will write superhero stories, but then you'll write very personal memoirs or semi-memoirs like Essex County. So, I don't know, do you have a style that you prefer, or do you have a story that you feel you need to communicate more than the other?
No, because I don't separate those two things as much as other people do. I think the best superhero stuff is when someone brings a very personal point of view to those characters and uses them as a metaphor for something bigger than just what they actually are, you know, which is what I've always tried to do. And I put as much of myself into writing superhero stuff when I can, as I do with Roughneck or other things. So I think and I grew up. That's why I fell in love with comics originally as a kid. Was reading superhero stuff, and it can be a very powerful genre to use. It's so mythical and it's so open for metaphor, and I still think there's a lot of value in it. So I don't turn my nose up on it as much as some people like to be snobby about comics and all superheroes, and then some people, you know, I feel like it doesn't. I just love comics, all comics. There's good superhero comics and there's bad superhero comics, and there's great slice of life literary comics and really bad ones, you know. And so anything good, I'll read. So I try not to be a snob.
Now, you did mention about reading comic books when you were a kid. I know from reading a few interviews with you, you've mentioned how your mother would go to the market and she would end up buying you these digest versions of old DC comics, and you would hide yourself away. I think it was in a self-made treehouse and just read them all day.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
I don't know. I don't know if it was a treehouse as much as like an old 2x4 nailed up.
How old would you have been at that point?
I was 19. It was embarrassing. I don't know how old I was, probably like 8 or 9 or something.
Did you feel that experience just being by yourself reading comics really?
It's still pretty much my favorite state. Being alone. I do like to be alone. I think you have to like to be alone if being a cartoonist, because it's really all it is you alone at a desk for a long time. Like creating one page of comics takes hours and hours and hours. So if you don't like your own company, you're in trouble. But yeah, I was always sort of a reclusive. I enjoyed my solitude, and I enjoyed getting lost in these stories, and I obviously still do. That's what I do. I get lost in these stories, but now I'm lucky enough I get to then write them down instead of just reading other people's stories.
That's interesting, because a lot of your books do deal with themes of isolation, alienation. Is that purposeful?
That kind of stuff, I don't approach it from an intellectual point of view, where like this story is going to be about isolation or whatever. You know, I just start writing stories, and then later I figure out I guess that was kind of about this.
It's more organic that way.
Yeah, I don't go into it with like an agenda of what the story will be about. I just follow whatever idea is intriguing me at the time, or whatever characters and what the stories are about thematically or whatever. That usually comes afterwards, you know. And honestly, lots of times you'll be doing interviews like this with someone, and they'll ask you these questions, and oh yeah, I guess that's what it is. Yeah, sometimes there's a danger if you start to analyze your own work and why you repeat the same kind of themes or stories or motifs. You can be in danger of once you figure them out, maybe they're not there to draw from anymore. So I try not to think too much about it.
And you actually write quite a bit, because in addition to your independent work, you're currently writing for Marvel. How many series are you doing at this point?
It was crazy. The last 2 years, I think I was averaging I was writing 7 books a month and then drawing 1 every month. But I cut it down to 4, which feels like a vacation right now. So it's, yeah.
How do you manage to do that?
Well, firstly, you got to really love what you do because you do it all the time. I don't know. I'm very disciplined. I've always been very self-motivated and disciplined. You know, you kind of have to be. And my Monday to Friday drawing takes way more time than writing. So Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. in my studio is all drawing mostly, and then I try to write 1 script a week. So I can do 4 or 5 scripts a month that way. And I write them on the weekends, a couple hours here and there, or a couple hours at night. Writing a Marvel script, I can do one in like 4 hours now. It's, I got it down.
Nice.
Yeah.
An acquired skill.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to ask you about Essex County. Yeah, it's probably the work that really launched you into mainstream attention, especially after CBC named Essex County one of the 5 essential works of Canadian fiction in the past decade. Now, how do you feel about an accolade like that?
It's super flattering. I think I'm more proud of helping the medium of comics gain recognition than personal. I just think it's a great indicator of how far comics have come, where you can have an event at a public library like this and 100 people will show up, as opposed to 10, 15, 20 years ago, it would be me alone and some bunch of sweaty guys on a comic shop. It's good that it's become more, the medium itself has become more, sorry, I didn't mean to offend any sweaty. I'm looking at you, Dad. What were we talking about? Yeah, it's great. I think it's a statement of all the people that came before me and laid the groundwork, like Seth and Chester Brown, and all these guys who were doing great work in Canada in the decade previous to me, who kind of spearheaded things and broke all the ground, and then I could come through and just the right project at the right time that got that kind of recognition.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's more of a sign of the state of the medium than just kind of personal achievement.
Mm-hmm. And there is more exposure to graphic novels and comics at this time. There's a lot of movie adaptations going out there. Certainly it's a lot more acceptable to call yourself a comic fan than it was 15 years ago.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, when I started doing comics around 99, 2000, taking it seriously, for me to try to learn how to do it and stuff, it was all self-taught. There was no resources for me really to learn the craft. But now in the States there are at least 3 or 4 schools that post-secondary schools that focus completely on cartooning and graphic novels. And it's crazy. It's great.
You mentioned your son earlier. Has he shown an interest in comics yet?
No, not really. He's a Lego guy. Yeah, it's around the house all the time. I don't force it on him because it's always going to be around. If he's going to be into it, he'll find it on his own. But he's into his own stuff, which is good. Yeah.
Did you have any friends that got you into comic books when you were younger?
No, I got other kids into comic books because I was like the only kid in my class who was really into comics. So I kept forcing it on a couple friends until I had someone to talk to.
Now, I mentioned this earlier when we were speaking alone, but I actually had the privilege of meeting Jeff. It would have been about 7 or 8 years ago. He actually granted us a nice meeting where he came to a seminar course at the University of Windsor hosted by Dale Jacobs, and he showed us some early work from one of your series that was just pending for release, Sweet Tooth. So I know Sweet Tooth was another series that really just blew into mainstream attention. It really garnered a lot of attention, a lot of positive reviews, and it's one of my favorite works of yours. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about the origin of Sweet Tooth a little bit and how you came up with the concept.
It's always, I never, any of these ideas or stories, they never just come to you fully formed, God, I don't know, Sweet Tooth is about, for anyone who hasn't read it, it's a sort of a post-apocalyptic science fiction story about little kids who are half human, half animal.
You described it one time as Mad Max meets Bambi.
Yeah, and the main character has antlers, and he's like a little deer boy. And I don't know, that probably came from, you know, I don't know where that came from. It's probably little pieces of different ideas here and there over a couple of years that you start putting together and building. Yeah, the stuff never comes fully formed like that. I know, I vaguely remember working on some idea about a kid and his dad at a hunting camp, and then another idea about like these human-animal hybrids. And I've always loved post-apocalyptic sci-fi stuff. Now there's too much of it now. It's kind of gotten crazy, but this was like 10, 15 years ago. And I don't know, these little ideas start to stick together and form into something. So yeah, where any of the ideas come from is kind of a mystery. You just kind of fall in love with some little emotion or image or feeling, and it keeps kind of sticks around and snowballs into something. So.
And I'm going to ask a very difficult question now. This is kind of asking a dad who their favorite child is, because you've worked on so many projects and so many franchises. What's the franchise or the project you worked on that you most enjoyed or were most proud of working on?
Essex County will always have a special place in my heart, because when I was working on that, I still, I wasn't making a living doing comics yet. I was still at a day job, and I was just so hungry to do it. And you know, so it's, you know, it's kind of like your first love or something. And it was the book that kind of I built my career on. So I'll always have a special place in my heart. Sweet Tooth always as well will be kind of special to me, and now I think Secret Path will probably be the third one, just because of it's become so big and it's become so much bigger than me or Gord. The story is sort of, it's become such a cultural touchstone now this year and stuff, and I think it will be moving forward for kids in schools and learning about residential schools, using it as a tool and stuff. It's kind of surreal, and to be just a small part of that is something pretty special. So.
Now, for any aspiring comic artists or writers out there, what advice would you give them to break into the field?
I always get this question, and I'm terrible at advice. You know, I can only relay my own experiences, which was I spent a good, you know, I really started taking comics seriously in 99, 2000, and trying to do it every day. And I went through a good 4 or 5 years where I made a lot of really bad comics. And made a lot of comics that no one will ever see, I hope. But it wasn't until I kind of made all that bad stuff and got it out of my system, trying to imitate other artists I like, trying to do stories that I thought maybe would, you know, you're doing things for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't until I kind of took a step back and looked back where I came from, Essex County, and started to write about my childhood and about this place where I grew up and stuff, and that I found my own voice. So I think more than anything, you just gotta try to find a story that only you can tell and tell it. And try not to be worried about what kinds of stories are popular or what kinds of stories you think an editor will publish. Or you gotta just tell something only you can tell the way only you can tell it. And it takes doing a lot of bad stuff to find that. But so just hard work, perseverance, and just sticking with it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And actually, your break, I should really mention, was, I think it was 2005 with Lost Dogs.
Yeah, I self-published. That was my first book, Lost Dogs, self-published in 2005. Yeah, it was the first thing where I kind of started to feel like I was finding my way a little bit, and then Essex came right after that. So.
Can you speak up, please?
No. Yes, sorry.
So at this point, I want to ask you, what stories or comics do you have coming out in the near future that we should be looking out for?
Well, I'm gonna start scaling back on the Marvel and DC stuff next year, or this year now we're here. And my big projects are, well, Roughneck, which comes out in April, is my next graphic novel. And then I have a new book called Royal City, which is probably the closest thing to Essex County that I've done since Essex County. It's about a family in a small town, a small factory town, and actually I have some cool promotional stuff over there that I'll give to anyone who's here. I'll sign it for you. But so that book starts in March, and then Descender is my big sci-fi series that I'm writing for Image, which continues. And then Black Hammer is, it's kind of like Essex County with superheroes. Right after Essex County, I came up with Black Hammer. This was 2007, and I was going to draw it as my next thing. And it was really, literally was like another Essex County story, but just with superheroes. But I never got to it, and I kept putting it off, but I always loved the idea. So a couple years ago, I approached another artist about drawing it, and so Black Hammer is kind of the thing right now that I'm honestly probably most proud of. I feel like it's perfectly marries. We were talking earlier how I do superhero stuff and more literary, personal stuff, and this is the one project that probably perfectly blends those two things into something. I'm really happy with it.
And when is that coming out?
It's been coming out. It started in last year, so I think issue 6 is coming out.
Issue 6.
The first graphic novel collection comes out in April, I believe.
In April? Okay.
Yeah, I think.
So look, in April, there's going to be a lot of stuff from Mr. Jeff Lemire coming out.
Yeah.
So I do have another question, and I always like to ask authors and creators this, because I'm always looking for new comics to read. I'm always looking for new novels to consume. What have you been reading? What have you been looking at lately that's piqued your interest, that you've been enjoying?
Yeah, this is the other question I get a lot, and I always draw blanks. What have I been reading? I've been reading I haven't been reading a lot of comics. I know I shouldn't say that, but like the moment I wake up until the moment I go to sleep is comics. So when I want to sit down and read for a couple hours at night, I tend to not read comics anymore because I need to kind of take a break. So I've been reading a lot of the author Ian Banks has been the guy I've been really into lately, and I kind of I see a little bit of myself in him, and that he had this career as a literary novelist as Ian Banks. Did books like The Lost Factory and The Quarry, and then he also wrote hard science fiction as Ian M. Banks. So he kind of walked between the two worlds, kind of like I do with superhero stuff. And so I kind of like that he could have a career like that. That was respected. So I've been reading a lot of his stuff. Comics-wise, I'm drawing a blank. Even though I know I do read a lot of stuff, it's just like, I can't think of one right now.
Well, actually, this leads into my next question I have for you, and this is regarding adaptations, because you do write a lot of original material, and then you work with established franchises for companies like Marvel, such as your run on Moon Knight. But would you want to make an adaptation of something like an Ian Banks book?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm more focused right now on doing my own stories. Why would I want to adapt someone else's stuff if I can sit down and do something that's all my own? It's hard to make that decision. And the Marvel DC stuff's a little different because you kind of grew up reading that stuff, and so there's a fondness for it, and it's fun to kind of play in that playground a little bit. But if I was going to actually sit down, rather than try to adapt someone else's personal work, another author like that, I would just do my own project, I think. Yeah.
So with that said, you already mentioned, once you're done during the day, no more comics. It's a bit overrun. You're a little bit maybe inundated by them. So what do you do in your spare time when you're not writing comics?
When I have some, I'll let you know. I don't know. I don't have a lot of spare time. I work all the time, and then I have a family, so we do family stuff. But my only kind of non-comics passion is still hockey. I watch a lot of hockey and play every week, every other week. It's kind of like the only time I can kind of shut my brain off and get into something else. Yeah, so I don't have a lot of free time. But if I did have free time, I would just want to make more comics. That's the joy of getting to do what you love as your job. It's like you want to do it all the time. So it's a great place to be, that's for sure.
And I'm sure the next thing I'm going to ask you is also a question you get asked all the time. But of course, you've written for many established series. You've written for X-Men, Moon Knight, Constantine, I think Animal Man as well. Is there a series or a character that you want to write that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Not at this point. Yeah, I went through that when I first got the chance to write for Marvel or DC. You have like a shopping list of all the stuff you grew up that you love, that you'd love to write this character one day or whatever. But you get over it pretty quick once you start to see how the sausage is made. Like when you get behind the scenes, the romance goes out of it pretty quick. And, at this point, like I said, I'd rather just write my own stuff. It's like you get to the point where you start coming up with ideas for X character or whatever Marvel DC character, and then there's always a point where you stop and say, why am I giving this corporation my ideas when I can take the same ideas, kind of twist them into my own thing and do my own story. So I'm kind of lucky. I'm at the point where I'm more interested in doing my own stuff. And often, what I did find when I got to write one of the characters that I really loved when I was a kid was you're so in love with all the stuff that came before you that it's hard to make it your own because you just want to tell stories like the ones you liked. So sometimes it was characters that I didn't read a lot as a kid or didn't really care about, like Animal Man or Green Arrow, that I did the best work with because I didn't really have all that baggage. I could just make it my own and wasn't too concerned with what had come before me.
So we don't have too much more time for the interview. Just before we end it, I do want to ask a question. And this one I've always wanted to ask to different comic writers, artists, and it's about the legitimacy of comics. When Essex County made it to CBC Canada Reads, there was a little bit of contention about the eligibility of the book being within that category. So how would you address that? How would you address someone coming in saying comics aren't real literature, comics are just dumb juvenile power fantasies?
Well, I understand where they're coming from because it's changing now, I think, but maybe even 10 years ago, 5 years ago, when people thought of comics, they probably just thought of one narrow type of comic, superhero comics or whatever. But I mean, if you just boil down comics to what it is, it's words and images together, and that's limitless. Like film, like literature, you can do anything with it. You can tell any kind of story. You can work in any medium or any genre. I think something like Secret Path just shows the power of it, where it's a silent, wordless thing, but it can convey so much emotion. It can convey any sort of story. So. Yeah, I think it's of all the art forms, it's becoming so popular because it is so limitless and so open. Yeah.
Well, Jeff, with that said, I want to thank you for coming here today to Windsor Public Library and speaking with us. Also, I want to thank everyone who has come to attend this conversation. And I also want to thank Biblioasis for coming by. They actually have some of Jeff Lemire's works on sale, and from what I understand, Jeff, you'll be doing a bit of a signing after this conversation?
Yeah, sure. Do we have time for any questions from the audience?
We have time for audience questions.
Hi. So when you're working on a Marvel or a DC book, can you talk about how much editorial mandate there is? So like, what's the push and pull between what they want and what you want in the story?
It's always different. It depends on the character. It depends on what editor you get put with. I've had really great experiences. Like right now I'm working on Moon Knight, and it's almost like create your own book. Like they're so hands off. They just kind of let me do whatever I want with that book, and I think it shows. And then there's other things like the X-Men where it's a massive franchise. You're working with, there's multiple titles at the same time with the same characters, different editors you have to work with, and that it can get pretty frustrating where the storylines are so dictated by the editorial staff of what you have to tell throughout the next year that the amount of yourself you can put into those books it's really tricky and it's a real challenge. So it really just depends on the book, on the editor. It can be really great, it can be really restricting. I've had both experiences.
Hello, thank you for being here. It's a big honor and a great experience to meet you, and thank you so much. My question is, how do you manage your work life and family life? Because you mentioned the 7-year-old son.
Yeah.
I was just wondering.
I try to be very disciplined, so I'm very structured. I go to my studio in the morning, just like any other job, and work until 4:30, and then I try to leave it in the studio and go home and make dinner and do work stuff, and then I try only to work at home when my son's really into Lego or doing something on his own and there's free time. But I try not to. I just try to keep it as separate as possible. I'm always thinking about the stuff, and I'm sure it can be frustrating to my wife, who's sitting right there. But at times where I'm preoccupied with some story that I'm working on, but as much as I can, I try to be present when I'm home, and you know, I focus on work when I'm at work and try to focus on home when I'm at home as much as possible. Yeah, I used to work in, like when I first started, I just had a little desk in my house or whatever, but when my son became 2 or 3, and he became aware that I was there, and it's hard to, when he's crawling in your studio wanting to play, he's a lot cuter than whatever I'm drawing. It's hard to separate those two things, so I had to kind of. Plus, I have so many comics that there's no more room for them at home, so I had to have a studio to put them all in.
Have you ever thought of writing screenplays? And if it was, would it be something based on your own work, or would you, Kevin Foggy came to you and say, hey, we mind write a script, man?
I don't think they've announced it yet, but I actually am writing my first screenplay right now for my book Plutona. I'm writing the screenplay, so that's my first. This will be my first attempt at it. It should be interesting. I'm just at the very beginning stages of it now, so I'm still not too jaded yet. We'll see how it goes.
Do you focus more on your own?
I would, yeah. I think I would just want to do my own stuff. I don't know that I would. I'm not too interested in writing movies for things that are more personal than my own thing. Yeah, it's not really. I mean, movies. I mean, I love films and stuff, but I really just want to do comics, honestly. And the only time I'm a little bit tempted to do screenwriting is almost just as an experiment with one of my own properties, just to kind of see how it goes. But it's not something I really am passionate about.
Hi, I'm currently finishing up my teacher's college, and I just want to say that I've used a lot of your work in most of my classrooms.
Oh, cool, thanks.
And I'm really trying to get comics into the classroom. Because
I hear that more and more. It's really awesome. Yeah, thanks.
And The Secret Path is just amazing. It was perfect to bring in residential schools.
I think I should have said, you asked about how the book was silent and wordless, and I think I wasn't consciously aware of this when I was doing it because I was just thinking, oh, we'd have the music, so I don't need words. But now I'm realizing the fact that it's wordless has been so valuable to for younger kids at schools, because it becomes like an interactive thing where they can take one of the songs from Secret Path, and instead of me telling them what it's about, the teacher can assign it to them and they can interpret the visuals and bring back stuff. And so I think it's become a really good educational resource, almost coincidentally. It's been good. Yeah. And I like your shirt, by the way.
Okay, I just recently read Plutona, actually, and it's like one of my favorite comics of all time.
Oh, thanks.
But personally, I've never been the kind of like comic reader who's been into the superhero area. I'm more into like the dramatic tales and stuff like that, and mystery. But Plutona was super accessible for me, and I really liked her character. I wanted to ask if you were inspired by like any superheroes in general for her, or if there's like a series that I could get into, like that was like you would recommend one for me. That you could kind of draw from Plutona.
To be honest, Plutona was, I wrote, for anyone who hasn't read it, I wrote that book, but my friend Annie Lennox, a cartoonist, she drew it, and it was her idea and her character. So so I can't really speak to the actual inspiration for the character because it was something she brought to me and I fleshed out for her. But in terms of other superhero stuff, was your question?
If there's anything that I could access as somebody who's never really gotten into it before, I would like to, though.
Yeah, gosh, you put me on the spot. There is some cool kind of alternative superhero stuff out there. I know, I don't know if you're familiar with Faith Erin Hicks. She's a Canadian cartoonist. She's done some cool kind of alternative superhero work. There is stuff. I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
It's okay. I'll definitely look her up. So
but there is cool. It's a great. I love superheroes, and there's a lot of cool alternative kind of superhero stuff aside from the mainstream stuff.
Yeah,
if
thank
you start
you
getting
so much.
into it. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I just want to know a little bit more about your, because you mentioned earlier about your creative process. In terms of like, how do you, because you have your idea, you have your inspiration, and you're talking about like how you put your scripts together. Is there a process that you first establish your ideas down, or is there any kind of a method that enables you to work a little faster, or is that just through constant repetition?
I used to come up with all my stuff. I used to be like very visual minded, so it would all be in sketchbooks. I'd be drawing stuff, and a certain image or character would reoccur over and over again, and to the point where you start to make up a little story around this character, and that's kind of how Sweet Tooth and things like that form. But more recently, I think I've become a little more story-driven, where it's more like a story concept or a certain character will be the thing, and I work on it in passes. So no story ever comes fully formed. It's just usually a couple little random ideas that don't really make sense together yet, and you kind of put them down on a piece of paper together, and I put it away, and I'll come back to it, and then I find that just some time away, when I come back to it, the problems with that idea, the things that don't make sense, pop out right away. So once you start to identify what's not making sense, it's almost like you're problem solving all the time, and I just do it in passes over the course of weeks or months. You keep coming back to things and going over them, and you just might figure one little thing out each time, but before you know it, you've built this world or this story. And I think the short answer is it's a process, and it takes a long time. There's never just all there at once. It's a lot of hard work. You kind of a gut feeling of when you start to stick something that doesn't feel right, you take it out. When something does fit the story, you can just have it feels good and it works together. So it's a process. Yeah.
And just one more question regarding Descender. Working with Dustin, do you give him more creative freedom to establish some of the paneling, or are you kind of more hands-on with it?
Totally hands-off. Yeah, the best collaborations I've had with Dustin and a couple other artists, it's like we barely talk. Yeah. And it's not because we don't like each other or we don't like to talk, it's because we just don't need to. It's almost like we share some kind of weird brain where I do my thing, give it to him, and he never gives me any notes in the script, and he just does all, it just works. I find when a collaboration isn't working, that's when you have to talk more and more to get, that one's effortless. We're just like, it's the most effortless collaboration I've ever had, so
great work.
We'll probably work together forever.
So once more, I just want to thank you so much for coming by today, Jeff. It's been an amazing opportunity to speak with you, and as a fan of your work, it's been an incredible experience just to sit down and chat about this. Now, just before we get to the signing, I actually have something.
I'm a little nervous.
Nothing to be too nervous about, but it is a small token of our appreciation for you taking the time out of your busy schedule to have a conversation with us today. A gift from the Windsor Public Library.
Oh, thank you.
It's a handsome tote bag. But beyond that, it's also what's within the tote bag. And given your interest in the history of Essex County, I think you might find these interesting.
Oh, very cool. Thank you very much. Thanks. It's Windsor Star Archive.
Yeah, 2 volumes of From the Vault.
Thanks. That's great.
And we actually want to thank Biblioasis as well. Great publisher and bookstore in the city.